I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. All right. Happy Thursday, guys. Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest tonight is Dan Cohen. We'll see if Miko is able to make it, but Dan is already here. Whenever you're ready, Dan, just give me the thumbs up. All right, guys. My special guest tonight is Dan Cohen. He is a journalist and a filmmaker and also a very fierce activist for the pro-Palestinian fight. Welcome back, Dan. I know it's been a minute, but welcome back.
Thank you, Sabrina. How you doing?
I'm doing very great. I know that you've been very busy. I've seen a lot of your videos and your content on Twitter, especially surrounding this particular issue. So it's great to have you back.
Definitely good to be with you. I appreciate you having me. Let me retweet. Send me the stream and I'll retweet it so people see. Do you have a link up?
Yeah. Give me just a second. I'll send it to you. And I think I see Miko too. So I'll go ahead and bring him in as well. Just send this to you. There you go. All right, Miko, whenever you're ready, just give me a thumbs up and I'll bring you in. All right, guys. And my other special guest tonight is Miko Peled. He is an Israeli-American activist, and he's also the author of The General Son. Welcome back, Miko.
Good to be with you again. Thanks for having me. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Miko. How you doing?
All right.
So it's great to have both of you guys on together. I know when I spoke to both of you last time, it was before this conflict happened on October 7th. So I know it's been a minute, but a lot of things have happened in reference to Israel and what's happening in Gaza, also in the West Bank, which I think some people may not be aware of. There's conflict happening there as well. And I want to get into the events that happened on October 7th, but I think it's important to go back to the beginning and explain how we got here. I just think that's important for people to understand, because I've noticed a lot of people on social media, they're saying that this all started October 7th. I think we know that's not the case, that there's been a conflict for a long time, that the Palestinian people basically are living in an open air prison. They don't control the resources. Israel controls the resources. And so it seems like to me, because of the imprisonment of the Palestinian people, that's part of the reason why things escalated to the way that they are today. But I want to hear from both of you. Let's go ahead and get started with you, Dan. What do you feel caused the events on October 7th? Why do you feel it has escalated to this point?
Well, yeah, a lot of people think everything started on October 7th the same way that a lot of liberals thought that, the Ukraine war started in February 2022 on February 27th or whatever it was. And, and there was an 8-year civil war that had been raging and had killed 15,000 people then. And in the case of, Israel, Palestine, there's been, really you have to trace it back to the fundamental issue, which is Zionism, the colonization of Palestine. But, even if you want to bring it to more, you could even look at the day before October 7th. October 6th, there was a pogrom carried out in the Palestinian village in the occupied West Bank of Hawara, in which a bunch of settler fanatics, led by an Israeli member of Knesset, actually went and murdered a Palestinian man. And so we're supposed to pretend that didn't happen. And then actually that guy was recently appointed to a very important position overseeing the West Bank and on the defense committee in the Knesset. So they want to pretend that like there's nothing happening, that everything in Gaza was, nice and happy, and everyone, it was like kumbaya all throughout the Holy Land before October 7th. And then, just all of a sudden these crazy terrorists decided to kill a bunch of innocent babies and cut their heads off. So it's just totally a bogus narrative. And the fact is, it's no secret to anybody at this point who's dealing with reality that Gaza has been under siege, a suffocating, brutal siege for 17 years. And inevitably people are going to rise up, just like anybody would. If somebody had trapped me, kicked me out of my house, trapped me in some little corner of, some piece of land and bombed me and shot me, of course people are going to rise up inevitably, invariably, as they should, for their own rights, for their own freedom, as any patriot would do. So, I mean, it's just such a phony narrative and it just shows that nobody actually cares. None of these people cared about Palestine or Gaza or Israel or whatever until suddenly, the Palestinians in Gaza shook the cage and said, "Hey, we're here. We're going to do something about it." So that's my summation of the issue.
Miko, I want to get your opinion about this as well, because your father was a general, so you were on the other side at one point. What were some of the things that you saw that you feel led to this moment?
Well, there's something a friend of mine, Bassem Tamimi, said a long time ago. He's the father of Ahed Tamimi, who's now imprisoned again. But she became famous when she slapped a soldier, and she was asked why she slapped a soldier, and she said because they took Jaffa in 1948. That's when it all started. I mean, everything that is happening since, including October 7th, including everything that's happened over the last 75 years, began when the initial sin of the occupation of Palestine and the establishment of an apartheid state. That is the root of all of it. That is the initial sin. And so one thing leads to another. Attacks on Gaza have been going on for 70 years. It's nothing new. Of course, Israel's firepower is much greater now, so they're able to kill thousands, a lot more than they used to. But this is really what it's all about. And what's almost unbelievable is to see how a small group of fighters coming out of one of the most oppressed and poor places on earth, the Gaza Strip, were able to completely paralyze the state of Israel that the world sees as some kind of a, modern, sophisticated democracy with a strong military and a strong intelligence capabilities. And it was paralyzed. And in many ways, it's still paralyzed and not functioning. The airport, the economy, I mean, so many aspects of what used to be considered normal life and in Israel, for Israelis, is gone. Not to mention their sense of security and safety, particularly in the areas, in the settlements that were in the south around the Gaza Strip. So I mean, it's incredible to see that, and the reaction of the state of Israel is a reaction of a bully who was humiliated. So they're just unleashing this savagery against innocent civilians, which is what a bully would do, which is what a gangster would do if it's humiliated. It'll find the weakest link and just lash out and punish the weakest of the weak, which is what is happening right now. And as we see on a regular basis, Palestinian fighters are still fighting and still killing Israeli soldiers. So this unleashing of savagery against Palestinian civilians is not affecting that. But the reaction of Israelis in the press, the reaction of Israelis in the street, this really sharp turn into fascism, with no tolerance for any kind of dissent, no tolerance for any kind of attempts. And there are small attempts here and there by some Israeli Jews and Palestinians to get together, to express some sort of, unity in their struggle for to end the violence and end the madness, are being completely, beaten and shut down brutally, in a brutal way, by the Israeli police. And of course, Palestinians have never been safe anywhere, but now the lack of safety for Palestinian lives, regardless of where they live and where they are in the apartheid bureaucracy, if they're citizens of the state, if they're living in Jerusalem or anywhere else, is completely gone. And the madness, the savagery has been unleashed on every single level and every single aspect of life. So this is to see the way Israelis, and not a single reflection, not a moment of reflection saying, wait a minute, why is this happening to us? What have we done? What can we do to change things? They are, and again, as a whole, as a society, as when you look at the press, when you see posts on social media and so on, there's a sense of self-righteousness that is almost unbelievable. Almost. I mean, it's believable if you know Israel and you know Israeli society, but it's almost unbelievable. And then, of course, the discourse here in the United States is incredibly racist and anti-Palestinian.
That's correct. One of the things that I've been telling people is about the resources that are along the Gaza coast, because I think that a lot of people were not aware of this. This information is starting to spread thanks to social media, but the resources that are there, the oil, the gas. And so one of the things that I saw Richie Medhurst explain is that the plan was not just to stop with the settlements where they are. The plan was to push the Palestinian people out of Gaza and into Egypt, even though Egypt said they cannot take 2 million people. But this idea of a greater Israel to expand into the southern part of Lebanon, parts of Syria, which Israel is also bombing Lebanon and Syria now too. And it's interesting, our political officials don't seem to be saying much about that. And part of Jordan as well, this idea to expand. And I want to hear your opinion about that after I play this clip, because RFK Jr. said something recently in an interview with Dave Rubin, and this has gone viral on Twitter, and it's basically explaining what this is really about. What I've said before is not about the people, it's not about Israeli lives, it's not about Palestinian lives in reference to the US government, it's about resources. So I want to play this clip really quick from RFK, who says the quiet part out loud.
And Israel is critical. And the reason it's critical is because it's a bulwark for us in the Mideast. It's almost like having an aircraft carrier in the Mideast. It's our oldest ally. It's been our ally for 75 years. It has been an incredible ally for us in terms of the technology, the exchange. And, and building the Iron Dome, which we paid a lot for, has also taught us enormously about how to defend ourselves at home for missiles. So those military expenditures are all going, 75% of it goes to U.S. companies under the agreement, under the MOU. But if you look at what's happening in the Mideast now, Iran is now the closest allies to Iran are Russia and China. Iran also controls all of Venezuela's oil. Hezbollah is in Venezuela. They have propped up the Maduro regime, and so they control that oil supply. BRICS, Saudi Arabia is now joining BRICS. So those countries will control 90% of the oil in the world. If Israel disappears, the vacuum in the Mideast, which is, Israel is our ambassador, it's our presence, our beachhead in the Mideast, and it gives us ears and eyes in the Mideast. It gives us intelligence. It gives us the capacity to influence affairs in the Mideast. If Israel disappeared, Russia and China would be controlling the Mideast, and they control 90% of the world's oil supply, and that would be cataclysmic for U.S. national security. So that's the answer to you.
So this right here, to me, basically just says that it's not necessarily about caring about the Jewish people in Israel. It's more so about controlling the oil. And RFK Jr. says here that, well, if we were to break that relationship that we do have with Israel, that basically the BRICS countries would get control of the oil. And I feel like this was him saying the quiet part out loud, but I want to pass it to you, Dan. What do you think about this statement RFK said here?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a major geopolitical interest here, which, could be the reason this happened in the case that there was some kind of conspiracy to allow this to happen inside the Netanyahu, government in the Israeli deep state. I don't know. I mean, to me, the question of like, was there a conspiracy or did it happen sort of completely organically is important, but it's kind of like asking if an avalanche started because, some rock shifted naturally under the snow, or if somebody like threw a little, mini explosive on it. Fundamentally it was going to happen either way. You keep a bunch of people in a bombed out ghetto and they're going to rise up one way or the other. So what kicked it off? But definitely, I mean, there's major geopolitical interests here. It's no secret. There's plenty of reporting about the gas off the coast of, of Gaza in mainstream media that, Israel has openly sought to develop. So there can be no question about it. And yes, when you look at the Belt and Road Initiative that the U.S. has sought to counter, with pipelines coming through the Gulf states, to across to Gaza and to supply gas to Europe in order to have some kind of alternative to Chinese, Russian gas. It definitely makes a lot of sense. There's, but I think it's definitely an important part of the equation. But there's like a greater ideological drive that of Zionism, expanding borders, ethnic cleansing. They've always sought to reconquer Gaza. I mean, especially after 2005, there's been a strong, it's not like the settlers just gave up. They're like, oh, that's too bad. We gave it up, and that's that. When Sharon initiated the so-called disengagement from Gaza, prominent settler rabbis they did like curses on him so he would die. He went into a coma not long after, and they thought that it was because of their intervention. Yeah, the Pulsa de Nura, they call it. I'm sure Miko, you remember all that stuff, but so they actually think that like because of that they got God to put a curse to put Sharon into a coma. What's that?
I'm saying he was cursed, all right. I'm just not sure it was the rabbis that
right, exactly. So, so the settlers have always, sought to like. There's been a powerful movement. I mean, they would have demonstrations wearing orange. I don't know exactly why the color orange. Maybe Miko knows more about that, but where they would say we're going to take Gaza again, and so you see this drive. I mean, I tweeted at the beginning of this whole thing. There's an Israeli member of Knesset named Orit Struk who was, who was making statements back in March about how, yes, we are going to reconquer Gaza. I don't know exactly when, and it's going to cost a lot of Israeli blood. There's going to be a lot of casualties, but it's worth it to have those settlements back. And it's not that, they're just going to have a few settlements here and there in very specific locations. They want to have a full ethnic cleansing. So as, trying to remember which member of Knesset said it, but maybe Miko remembers. But one of them early on in this said, the goal is that a Jewish child can walk down the street of Gaza City unharmed. And so that's fundamentally what I think it's about. Though definitely the resources are an important issue. So at the kind of broader geopolitical level, which maybe put the plan in. If there was some kind of plan that could have put it into motion, definitely a possibility.
Miko, how did it get to the point where the Palestinians that live in Gaza don't have control over those resources? Because technically, I say a fence is not a border, but technically if they're fenced off from Israel, how did it get to that point where they don't have control over those resources that are along the Gaza coast?
Well, Palestinians don't have control over any resources in their country anywhere. So I mean, this is not unique. But I got to say something about this RFK thing. I don't know what's worse, the fact that he's stupid or the fact that he's ignorant. But in this particular clip, there's a convergence of his stupidity and his ignorance, which is so glaring. First of all, the U.S. has other allies. Egypt is an ally. Saudi Arabia is an ally. Jordan is an ally. Iraq used to be an ally, and they all, and Jordan doesn't have oil, but the other ones had oil, and then they buy weapons from America, and they supply plenty of billions of dollars to the U.S. economy. So what is this nonsense about Israel somehow being unique? I really don't know. Now, in terms of Israel being such a great ally, he forgot to mention the USS Liberty, a U.S. naval vessel, where U.S. Service, servicemen and men only, I think, were massacred by the Israeli military. Jonathan Pollard, who was a spy who sat for 30 years in an American jail and then was received as a hero when he immigrated to Israel. And then numerous, Rachel Corrie and numerous other Americans that were brutally killed by the Israeli military, by settlers, and so on. So he's either really stupid or really ignorant of both. But there's really nothing at all about what he said that is fundamentally true. I mean, yes, there is this relationship, and they do exchange technology. But if Israel is such a great power if it's intelligence resources, the intelligence capabilities are so fantastic, what happened on October the 7th? And by the way, what happened 50 years before October the 7th, on October the 6th in 1973, when Israel was surprised, and again, almost ended in a catastrophe of Israel. Every time the Israeli military and intelligence services are challenged, they collapse. So all of this nonsense is just so glaring, it's just absolutely glaring. And by the way, if tomorrow morning there was a free and democratic Palestine, which is something, so many of us are talking about, if tomorrow morning, there was the apartheid state of Israel collapsed and a real democracy with equal right took its place, why would that be less of an ally? Why would they not want to do trade with Israel, with the United States? You think their capabilities, technological capabilities, will somehow disappear? I mean, this is all such nonsense. Does it have to be a violent, racist regime to be this bulwark, to be this what do you say, aircraft carrier or whatever it was that he said? It's complete and absolute nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And by the way, if anybody, if an Israeli child wanted to walk down the streets in Gaza, they would be perfectly safe, because Palestinians wouldn't harm a child under any circumstances. So I mean, these are all stereotypes. These are all characteristics. These are all kind of bumper sticker statements, which have absolutely no truth whatsoever on any level. Nobody needs this apartheid state. Nobody does. I think even Israel, I don't think any doubt that Israelis will fare much better once the apartheid collapses and a real free democratic state, a free Palestine, a free democratic Palestine takes its place. So I think it's really important to take a look at these statements by a guy that wants to be president, for crying out loud, and just to call out the stupidity and the ignorance of what he says, because none of it was true. Absolutely none of it. And BRICS, by the way, the BRICS countries, with the exception now of South Africa, are all have great relations with Israel. They're all buying weapons from Israel. India certainly is. China is. Russia and Israel have great relationships. Putin and Netanyahu are on the phone, every week, or at least they used to be until October the 7th. So all of this is complete nonsense. None of this is true. And I think it's important to point this out, because people don't realize this. They hear this guy talk, and it sounds like he knows what he's talking about, and he's actually, what he's doing is like this previous joke that he published when he was sitting on a couch there with that racist Boteach, whatever his name is, Shmuel Boteach. Shmueli. He sat with him, and you could tell that he was reciting from something that he just read an hour ago, and he couldn't quite even remember that very well. This here too, he was reciting from a piece of paper that was given to him by an Israeli lobbyist, by AIPAC or somebody, or maybe it was that same clown Boteach. I don't know. But I mean, that's what he was doing. He's reading this nonsense, and he's pretending like he knows what he's talking about, where it's all absolutely very easily refuted and very easily proven to be complete nonsense.
Dan, at some point, I know you did live there. What were some of the things that you saw in reference to the differences between the way the Palestinian people were treated and Israelis were treated? And do you think at this point in time that a two-state solution is still feasible?
You mean when I was in Gaza, or
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, Gaza is just a big concentration camp. There's no Israelis in there. Since the disengagement in 2005. But ever since then, when Hamas was elected, they basically turned the place into a complete concentration camp. The whole logic of Ariel Sharon, then the prime minister, was that, we can put a huge percentage of the Palestinian population in this tiny strip of land, give that up, and then focus on settling the West Bank, expanding colonies in the West Bank, which is much bigger and much more resource rich, and then also will give the appearance that the Israelis tried to have some kind of peace, but of course, the Palestinians wouldn't go for it. There was an aide to Sharon named Dove Weissglass who described it as putting the peace process in formaldehyde, freezing it, basically, like stopping it from moving forward at all. So, I mean, the conditions are horrific. There are no Israelis. Well, now there are Israeli soldiers in there, Israeli military. But ever since 2005, it's just been under the most severe siege and regular bombing and drone strikes. There's like a constant hum of drones above your head that sound like a cacophony of lawnmowers. It's like out of a nightmare, and that's always there. Like imagine just the constant stress of living with that, knowing that at any point somebody can just like press a button and you're dead. That's what Gaza is, even in so-called peacetime when there's not like active bombing. So I mean, but there's all kinds of different levels of apartheid throughout the rest of Israeli-controlled borders. But the reality is that the two-state solution was never realistic. It was the two-state solution that was proposed through the Oslo process was just to give Israel more control. And so to create the Palestinian Authority, so Palestinians, which was this neoliberal construction, to make Palestinians police themselves, to create a neoliberal economy, artificially kept afloat by donor money from the United States and Europe. So Palestinians will repress their own resistance, and then Israeli settlements can expand. And so what we have is Israel's one-state solution. The two-state solution was never meant to be achieved. It was always a smokescreen to come up with this permanent apartheid and eventually genocidal project. And so now that genocide is being carried out, and October 7th kind of flipped a switch in Israeli society from the permanent apartheid status quo into finish the job, full-on genocide. Even like the kind of Israeli center-left security types, or even like, sort of left-leaning people are all just like, this is it. They're all lined up behind the most fanatical figures in the country. So this is the one-state solution. The only alternative is the other one-state solution, which is one democracy, a binational state where everyone has the same rights, Israelis and Palestinians, which I'm of course an advocate of, and I know Miko is too.
All right, Dan, I know you have to head out. Miko, I have a couple questions for you if you have a little bit more time.
Thanks a lot for having me. Sorry I got to run early, but thanks very much for having me, Sabrina. Good to see you, Miko.
See ya.
All right, Miko, one of the questions I had, there was an initiative called the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, and I was looking over this. Apparently, it seemed like Hamas was even willing to consider that, and the Palestinian people were okay with agreeing with that. But from what I read, it said that the state of Israel, however, did not want to agree to that agreement. I want to understand like why, because I do feel like had that happened back then, maybe we would not be where we are today.
Yes, I mean the Saudi initiative of 2002 basically talked about a reasonable peace agreement between the Arabs and the state of Israel. Israel is not interested in peace. Israel is not interested in peace. Israel is interested in power. And we've seen this since it was established. The most important strategic objective of the state of Israel, as it was stated by the very first, prime ministers and ministers of defense and leaders of the Israeli military from the very beginning, and that hasn't changed to this day, is to be the scariest, toughest, meanest bully in the neighborhood, period. Anybody who tried to push for peace, for some kind of compromise, was pushed to the sidelines and their political history, political careers were destroyed forever. That is the history of the state of Israel. If Israel was interested in peace, there were many steps along the way since the establishment of the state of Israel where peace could have been achieved. Israel was not interested in peace. Israel had initiated war after war after war almost every single time in order to prevent the possibility of peace. And this is what people need to understand. Supporting Israel is supporting a war against peace, is supporting a war against the possibility of Israelis and Palestinians living in peace. That's what supporting Israel means, because an apartheid state can only exist in violence. You cannot have a racist apartheid state without violence, without discrimination, of course. We know this historically, and we see this, the 75 years in Palestine shows us that precisely. That is what it is all about. Now, to establish, I'll take it one step further, to establish a state for Jewish people in an Arab country, which is what Palestine is, requires an apartheid state. You can't do it without discrimination because the local population are not Jewish, they're Palestinians. And so one leads to the other. One sin, if you will, leads to the other. So, of course, there were many Arab initiatives for peace. The Saudi deal was probably the last one. And after that, it was made clear that Israel is not interested at all. And so that was the end of that. But there were many points along the way where Israel could have had peace with its Arab neighbors and established a small Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, and so on and so forth. They were not interested. On the fifth day of what is known as the 6-Day War, 1967 war, my father, still in uniform as a general, stood up and said, well, let's make peace now. We can allow the Palestinians to have a small, weak state on a small part of their homeland, which is the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Then we can make peace with the other Arab countries and we'll be fine. The other generals looked at him and laughed, and Israel was building massive settlements. And basically, from that day on, from that moment on, every Israeli government did everything they could to make sure a Palestinian state would be impossible, that only a single apartheid state, like Dan was saying, was a possibility, and that's what they did. They invested billions upon billions of dollars on making sure that there's no West Bank. They tried to do this in the Gaza Strip. It was a little more complicated. So they just pulled all the settlers out and closed the Gaza Strip like a concentration camp. But there is no West Bank. People talk about a West Bank as though it still exists. It exists in old maps and in some people's minds. But there's no West Bank. It's gone. It's all full of cities and towns and what have you, excuse me, for Jews only. No Palestinian can live in a house or an apartment in any of the cities and towns, well, anywhere almost in Israel, but particularly not in the West Bank. I mean, no Israeli towns and cities would allow Palestinians. It'd be a rare occasion that Palestinian can live in an Israeli community, but particularly in the West Bank. So that idea, again, it was repeated in Palestinians and Arabs, different Arab countries, different Arab governments tried over the years. And again, the Saudi deal was, by all standards, a deal that everybody should have accepted. Israel made it absolutely clear it is not interested. They laugh at these plans. They laugh at these attempts to bring peace, because Israel is not interested and has never been interested in peace. And another piece of this that's important to understand, I think, is that while supporting Israel is supporting a fight against peace, a fight against justice, a fight against liberation, a fight against all the the values that we share and many other people share. Supporting the Palestinian cause is the opposite. Supporting the Palestinian cause is supporting the possibility of peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Supporting the Palestinian cause, supporting a fully liberated and democratic historic Palestine from the river to the sea, as we know is said, that is supporting the possibility of Israelis and Palestinians living in peace, side by side, as equals. So these are the two sides. It's not Israel or Palestine, Israelis or Palestinians. No, it's racism and violence and the absence of peace, or not just the absence of peace, but the very active campaign against the possibility of peace if you support Israel, and the war, or I should say the support for the possibility of peace, which is what supporting Palestinian rights, justice, and liberation is when we support the Palestinian cause. So these are the differences. These are the real differences between the two sides.
So we've seen a lot of videos on social media showing just that Israel has been bombing Gaza relentlessly. Now I saw a video this morning where there are Palestinians in Gaza that are being basically forced further south. So I saw people taking this long trek, elderly people as well. I have to ask, in reference to countries like Egypt and Jordan, and the Queen of Jordan, she did speak out in an interview recently on CNN, and she's Palestinian, and she was explaining, what's happening to the Palestinian people is not okay. Why do you feel they are not willing to open their doors and allow them to come in there?
That's not the way I would phrase it. What the King Abdullah of Jordan said recently in a conference in Cairo, I believe, that the idea of pushing Palestinians out of Palestine into Jordan and Egypt is unacceptable. It's not that they're not willing to accept. The idea that Israel should be allowed to push millions of Palestinians, millions more, after the millions that are already out there having been pushed by Israel. The idea that Israel should be allowed and that Jordan and Egypt should be taking them in is absolutely unacceptable. Palestinians should not be kicked out of Palestine. Stop, full stop. It's not about Jordan. It's not about Egypt. And he said it very eloquently, and I think he was absolutely right. He further said what we're seeing today unfold is that, he said two very powerful statements. One is that it's clear that the issue of human rights has boundaries. And when human rights reach the borders of Palestine, they disappear. They no longer exist. Nobody pursues them anymore. And he said that Arab lives don't matter. He said our lives as Arabs do not matter. This is what we're seeing. This is the message that we're getting from America and its allies in Europe and so on. And this is very true. It's part of a whole package. It's not that they're not willing to accept. It's just the notion. They're not willing to accept the idea that Israel should be allowed to force more Palestinians out. And that's what Israel is doing. It's an ethnic cleansing of refugees who have already been subjected to ethnic cleansing. There's at least half of the people in Gaza are refugees or descendants of refugees whose homes are not in the Gaza Strip, whose lands are on the other side of the border, or lands are outside, places where the Palestinian fighters, many of the places the Palestinian fighters occupied on October the 7th, are actually lands that belong to Palestinians who are in Gaza right now. And of course, refugees elsewhere as well. So the notion that it's not that Jordan and Egypt are doing something wrong, is that they are unwilling to accept that Israel should be allowed to do something which is not only a violation of international law, it's a crime against humanity. Ethnic cleansing, it's a crime against humanity. And Israel is not only being given license, it's being given weapons to engage in crimes against humanity. This is far worse than terrorism. It's far worse than just violation of a particular law. These are crimes against humanity, and we've been seeing them for 75 years. But since October the 7th, once Israel was able to gather itself and begin this savage campaign of revenge against helpless people in Gaza, this is a massive crime against humanity, and we're seeing it on social media and we're seeing it on all the networks. Yep. And what we're hearing is people justify it. What we're hearing is people saying, no, this is okay. This was another Holocaust, all kinds of nonsense about what happened October the 7th. That is the issue here.
Miko, I've noticed because of the protest, numerous protests have happened all across the world, not just in the United States. We had large turnouts here in Boston. There was over 300,000 people at the protest in D.C., people pro-Palestinian protests that people are attending. I have noticed now that since those protests, that mainstream media, it's like they've now been forced to talk about the Palestinian side. Now, they still have their bias, but I noticed they're forced to talk about it now, the history of it, what's happening to people being bombed at refugee camps, the hospitals, etc. Ro Khanna recently had an interview and he said that when we went after Osama bin Laden, we didn't bomb entire villages. We went into the tunnels to capture Osama bin Laden. to push back on that talking point that, well, Hamas is using Palestinian people as human shields. So that was the pushback on that. But I noticed this. This was announced earlier today. It says that POTUS tells reporters no chances of a ceasefire, in Gaza. None, no possibility. I went on to say Joe Biden will lose in 2024. But this piece right here, obviously, if there is not a ceasefire, I mean, we're just going to see more and more Palestinian deaths. There's over 10,000 Palestinians that have died now. There are people that are telling me that they've lost entire bloodlines in Gaza since this started. What do you think is the correct decision here, but in going beyond the ceasefire? Because the thing is, even if you have a ceasefire, what does that mean for the people in Gaza? What do they have left to go back to? A lot of them have already lost, the little bit that they had. What do you feel beyond a ceasefire is the right thing to do?
I don't think there's any question that we are at a historic intersection right now. The Palestinians won enormously. The operation that began on October the 7th brought Israel to its knees and exposed Israel for the Israeli military and the Israeli intelligence apparatus to be nothing more than a paper tiger. So that's been exposed. The state of Israel was paralyzed. People are afraid to leave their homes. The economy is still, in severe jeopardy, even with all the billions coming from the United States. The military has proven to itself to be completely ineffective. I'm not saying it's very effective when it's bombing civilians with no defense. That's not the test of a military. But when they actually have to fight well-trained, motivated forces, they're losing. They were nowhere to be seen. I mean, entire settlements, entire cities, entire towns were being taken by, like I said earlier, a group of fighters that came out of the most poorest and most oppressed places in the world, and they managed to paralyze the state of Israel. The Israeli airport is not functioning not functioning well anyway. The economy is falling apart, and on and on and on. So this was a huge victory for the Palestinians. The question is what happens now. The question is, how do you translate a military? It's not only me saying it. I mean, Israeli generals couldn't stop praising the abilities of these Palestinian fighters. How incredible they were able to put together and execute this operation. And so what happens now is a big question. Is there someone there on the other side of the negotiating table, on the Palestinian side, that will push for real political gains? Because that's what it's about. It's about how you translate this into real political gain. And, if it was me or if they asked my opinion, nothing less than an absolute unconditional lifting of the siege. Nothing but an absolute unconditional release of all Palestinian prisoners. And nothing less than calling for a free one-person, one-vote election over all historic Palestine. In other words, the full collapse of the apartheid state. Israel can keep bombing and murdering Palestinians. At some point, it's going to have to stop. At some point, even Joe Biden and the U.S. administration is going to make them stop, because there's a limit to even Palestinian deaths beyond 10,000 is already people are feeling uncomfortable. So at some point, that's going to end. And there will be a ceasefire. But you're right. Israel, first of all, what are Palestinians going to go back to? Right. And number two, Israel violates every ceasefire it's ever signed. So 2-3 days, a week later, Israel is going to violate the ceasefire. We know that. There's a playbook. We've seen it over and over and over and over again over the years. So the question is, how do they rebuild? And what are Palestinians going to get now for their enormous sacrifice and for their military operation, which was incredibly successful? And that is the big question. That is the big, X factor. We don't know what's happening in the negotiations. We don't know what the Palestinians are demanding. And also we don't know, Israel has had quite a few casualties in the Gaza Strip, the ground forces, and we don't know how many casualties they can stomach. In 2014, when it came to, I think, 65 casualties, they pulled the ground forces out of the Gaza Strip because they couldn't handle it. Israeli public opinion turned, 65 casualties, military casualties was too much, and they pulled out the ground forces. And they have not put in boots on the ground in the Gaza Strip since then. Now, I can't remember what the number is, about 30 or so casualties. We'll see what happens when the casualty count rises, because the Palestinian fighters are still fighting, quite heroically. with nothing but Adidas sweatpants and machine guns mostly. And we'll see what happens. And again, there's a big X factor here in that as well, how the fighting is going to happen. And at what point Israeli society will not be able to handle it anymore. And again, what the Palestinians on the negotiating, because they're already negotiating, we know that. There's a reason Blinken is going to Qatar and he's in Jordan and so forth, and he's in Cairo. That's where negotiating takes place. I would hope that they're asking for the moon, because this is the time. This is historic. What we saw on October the 7th has changed the political reality and the military reality completely. So again, it all depends on what happened, what the ask is going to be.
All right, I have 2 more questions for you, Miko. One, I know you still have family members there. Are they aware, are people aware in Israel and in Gaza, are they aware that these protests across the world, how big these protests are they aware that people are siding with the Palestinians struggle here? And 2, if they are, how do they feel about that?
Well, they are aware, of course, but they see it as anti-Semitism. They brush it off as anti-Semitism, and the Israeli government is sending, the campaign here to vilify people who call for justice for Palestinians is enormous. We're seeing the what is being said about students on campuses here in the U.S. Israel just sent a former Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, who is a master liar and war criminal himself. He's been, I don't know why they gave him the platform, but he's on all the networks and he's meeting with, top officials, spewing this nonsense that somehow Hamas is engaged in genocide of its own people and all kinds of lies and nonsense. And he's saying, how could these people possibly protest to support, Hamas? So, they're worried about this. That's for sure. They're very much aware of this. And they're ramping up. I mean, I've got a few events coming up on college campuses, in the coming weeks, and the students, activists are telling me, the Zionists have ramped up their anti-Palestinian rhetoric and their anti-Palestinian activism to points that we've not seen before. And we can't forget that there's no symmetry here, because the pro-Israeli groups on campuses are very well funded. They're funded by a greater power. And they're given talking points, and they're given all these, entire curricula of how to deal with this and what to say and so on and so forth. And generally speaking, the administrations on campuses, are very, they see them in a very favorable way. The pro-Palestinian groups, the pro-justice and peace groups, it's just a bunch of kids. There is no machine that gives them the talking points. There is no machine that funds them. There's really no support. It's just themselves. And that's why we see it fluctuate. Some years, certain campuses are very strong. Some years, they're not so strong. It depends on the people on the ground, the students on the ground. And so we see Israel ramping up, and the Zionist groups throughout the country, throughout the U.S., ramping up its campaigns, anti-Palestinian campaigns, to a whole new level. So yes, they see what's happening, and they're very much aware of it. And I think they are very worried, of course.
And my final question for you is, what do you think the future holds for Netanyahu? I've seen video footage of Israelis protesting against Netanyahu in Israel, actually right outside of his home, calling him a baby killer. Some people are saying that Netanyahu may be on his way out. I want to get your opinion about that. Yeah,
well, if wishing made it so. Israelis have been protesting against Netanyahu for the last year. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis have been on the streets. He has a very secure majority in the Israeli Knesset. And it's a parliamentary system. So as long as he has a majority in the Knesset, which is the Israeli House of Representatives, he's safe. And he has a lock on the majority. There's a group, it's a coalition government. So there's several political parties that come together and they support him as prime minister. And they will not desert him. So he's got about 55% or close to 60%. And the people who oppose him are at best 40%. That was at the height of the protest against him. Now it's different because wartime, everybody comes together. He's not going anywhere, not anytime soon. He's not going anywhere. There's no other option. There's no opposition. everybody else is like a musical chairs. They all have the same views. They all were, if they weren't in charge of the military, if they're not now, then they were, a year ago. So, I mean, it's a musical chairs thing. Nobody can take his place. There's nobody strong enough, even with all the opposition, even the fact that he's been indicted on corruption charges and this massive military and intelligence failure that allowed October 7th to happen. And with the fact that, the hostages, what 200 or so Israelis have been taken, are in Gaza somewhere, and he's incapable of bringing them back. So all of these, even with all of this, he's lock on the majority, and as long as he has a lock on the majority, he's perfectly safe. I don't see him going anywhere, not anytime soon.
Interesting. Well, Miko, thank you so much for coming back on. And anything else that you have coming up that you want to announce?
Well, I would just want to say that I think it's important for people to keep standing for Palestine and supporting Palestinians in their call for absolute justice and freedom throughout all of Palestine. And remember that supporting that is how you support Israelis as well. Because at the end of the day, peace is going to be beneficial for everyone. And this brutal, savage apartheid state that we're seeing now, it can't be good even for those who see themselves as privileged. So I would encourage people to keep going in the streets, to keep having the conversations, to keep sharing shows like this, and to make sure that the message is very, very clear. If you're supporting Israel, you're supporting violence, and you're supporting a war against possibility of peace. If you're supporting the Palestinian cause, you're supporting justice and freedom and peace for everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Miko.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. So that was Miko Peled. Dan Cohen was on with him earlier. I hope you learned a little bit there, you guys. I know some of you are probably like, this conversation again. Yes, because there's new news every day. And I feel like people still have to be educated about this issue. Listen, mainstream media has a stronghold on this story. And there's a couple of things that I've seen them say that has not been correct. I've seen independent media debunk some of their talking points in reference to Israel and Gaza. But I think that we have to continue educating people about this issue, right? All right. We have 3 more stories we're going to discuss tonight, including one that is breaking news as of earlier this morning. First and foremost, I want to give a shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. Really do appreciate you peeps. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: Ultimate, Sabinators. There's also Sabsters, Sabbies, and of course, members. All of their names are lifted. All their names are listed here. And you can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. And I want to give a shout out to new Sabby patrons. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's give it up for Kathleen A. Daly, DJ Miami Smartass. I like that one. And Troy Harvey. Welcome, guys. And thank you so much. Awesome sauce. Awesome sauce. And we're going to go ahead and show that beautiful thumbnail to see what other stories we're going to discuss tonight. Again, we got a breaking news story. I'm actually going to talk about that one next. So tonight, we are also discussing Max Blumenthal State Department. We're going to get into that conversation. Max Blumenthal is at it again with his confrontations to the State Department. So that's a good story. We're also going to discuss Jill Stein 2024. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, believe it or not, here we go. And of course, Miko Peled and Dan Cohen were just here. And we're also going to talk about those significant wins in Ohio and Kentucky the other day. So let's go ahead and get into it. If you have not had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button. That helps me out with the algo, guys. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to some of the comments here, and then we'll get into the first story. Shout out to Heidi Lukill, who just became a Sabby member. Or Hetty, sorry. Hetty Lukill. Whoop, whoop. JB says new discoveries of natural gas in the Levant Basin are in the range of 122 trillion cubic foot while recoverable oil is estimated at 1.7 billion barrels. Whew. And thank you for the super chat, the purple marble. If Hamas hadn't originated from the Muslim Brotherhood, do you think there would be more regional allies willing to fight with/for Hamas and Palestinians? I don't know. I mean, I honestly think that it's very apparent that some of these other countries, particularly the Western countries, have these types of agreements with Israel, and they support and back Israel. And there's a lot to be said for that. Shout out to Kit from Hardlands Media. What's up, Kit? What's going on? All right. We're going to get into our first news story tonight. And, you know, this was breaking news this morning. Jill Stein. I think she shocked some people today. If you were on Twitter, I'm sure you saw this first thing this morning. But I want to take you back to, it was a couple of weeks ago when Jill Stein was actually on my show. And I asked her this question. And I actually was surprised by this response because I knew that Jill was a very busy person, has a lot going on. So let's go back to that moment. And then we're going to fast forward to the news that was announced today and what that means for 2024. Any plans for you to run for president or any political office in the near future?
Yes. Now, which office? I don't know, but you know, this is a conversation that's now happening in great, you know, intensity. And I think one of the things coming out of Cornell's legacy here is how important this race is and how much people really want. People are in rebellion now. There's just a full-scale rebellion taking place. And I was actually a little, you know, sort of not enthusiastic about a presidential run and thought it made a lot more sense for us to just pause that strategy because it tends to be so all-consuming and instead focus. And I was very interested in a congressional race myself. And then I got swept up because I thought, whoa, this is so exciting for Dr. West to be running as a Green. And so I spent like 4 months on that. And I'm really glad that I did. And I greatly value every minute of it and greatly value everything he's bringing to the race. But now it's clear that we need a Green to run this. And I would not have pushed this and promoted it had Cornell not been here. And now that he's vacated, now the question is, now what? And I think we can't just back off now. I don't think we can back off because we've seen how absolutely critical this is. So I'd say stay tuned and maybe we'll talk again in a month and see what's going on then.
Okay, so it's been about a month. It's been about a month, and Jill Stein does have an important announcement. This was released earlier on Twitter today. I'm going to play this clip. I'm going to tell you what I think about it, and then we're going to get into some other things as well. One thing I do want to mention, notice in that conversation that Jill Stein said that if Cornel West had not left the Green Party, she would not have pursued this endeavor. So that's just something to keep in mind. But once Dr. West did leave the Green Party, that left that spot open, meaning that the Green Party has to run a candidate for president. This is how you remain a political party. Like, you can't just be a political party and get the ballot access and you're not running anyone for president. PSL also runs presidential candidates. Libertarian Party will run someone for president. I believe his name is Lars, last time I checked. So this is something important to note. So somebody has to run for the Green Party. Now, obviously, Jill Stein would still need to get the nomination. But let's get into this announcement earlier today, which maybe broke Twitter. Maybe it broke Twitter.
People are tired of being thrown under the bus by wealthy elites and their bought politicians. Tired of living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to pay the rent, locked in student debt and medical debt, child poverty doubling, rising diseases of despair, growing hopelessness. The political system is broken. The two Wall Street parties are bought and paid for. Over 60% of us now say the bipartisan establishments failed us, and we need a party that serves the people. I'm Jill Stein, and I'm running for president to offer that choice for the people outside of the failed two-party system. We'll put solutions to the crises we face, crushing inequality, endless war, and climate collapse. And we'll put these front and center in this election and on the ballot across the country. The ruling parties that got us into this mess aren't getting us out. Both parties are squandering trillions on the endless war machine, fueling conflict around the world, while tens of millions here at home lack food, housing, healthcare. Democrats have betrayed their promises for working people, youth, and the climate again and again.
Let me pause here for a second and just mute it, because there's something that she showed here that I just want to share. I want to highlight on. Notice what they did here. When she started talking about Joe Biden, notice how they pointed out all the things, well, not all the things, but some of the things that Joe Biden did wrong. One, Joe Biden is killing $15 an hour minimum wage. That's the first thing they show. Then they fast forward to this article here. Biden blocks the railroad strike. And then they fast forward to Biden breaks campaign promise in allowing new offshore drilling. So I think that was smart. I think that was very clever. Just to remind people, they keep talking, the Democratic Party keeps talking about, oh, we got to sell the message better, and Joe Biden's done all these things. Just to remind people the things that Joe Biden did that actually hurt the American people, and particularly working class people. Oh, oops. Sorry, I forgot the volume.
And again, while Republicans don't even make such promises in the first place. And both parties are a danger to our democracy, expanding censorship, criminalizing protest, throwing competitors off the ballot, suppressing debates,
American people who've been systematically locked out of these debates,
rigging their primaries.
You guys see what's happening here? Pointing out all the things that they've done wrong. This is actually smart. That was when Jill Stein was arrested, right? Because she wanted to debate the Green Party candidates that were kicked off the ballot in North Carolina.
Off the ballot, suppressing debates,
American people who've been systematically locked out of these debates,
rigging their primaries. So forget the pundits and the attack dogs who tell you to ignore your misery and just keep voting for those who caused it in the first place. Change won't come from the ruling elites. It comes from we, the people. And when we stand together, we can create living wage jobs for all Americans. We can guarantee an economic bill of rights with the right to a job, to health care, to housing, to food, education, and more. We can abolish student debt, medical debt. We can create a Green New Deal with millions of jobs to fight climate collapse and protect Mother Earth. And we can ensure our constitutional rights and freedoms and justice for all. We can end the endless wars and rampant militarism and use diplomacy and international law instead to end violence, occupation, and apartheid. We do have the power, and we can use it in this election to start building an America and a world that works for all of us. Go to JillStein2024.com and join us.
All right, folks. So there it is. Jill Stein 2024. She's running for president again. People, planet, and peace. Now, we're going to talk about some pros. We're going to talk about some cons. Jill Stein will be here with me Sunday, so she'll be able to talk about her campaign. So any questions that you have for her, they'll most likely be answered during that interview. But I do just want to say this, because I noticed some people were really excited and some people were skeptical. You know, some people were like, well, oh no, is this to sabotage Dr. West? Yada, yada. So one thing I want to say again, and Echo J pointed this out, rightfully so. Echo J said, I mean, Green Party USA has to run someone and maintain federal election funding. I'm not surprised. Happy even. Yeah, so this is the thing that people have to remember. And this is the thing I did say when Cornel West decided to leave the Green Party and run as an independent. What did I tell you? I said, okay, so now the Green Party is going to have to run someone else. That could be anyone else. So for the people that have said to me, because a couple people already reached out to me today, they said, isn't this going to split the left vote? Well, here's the thing. When Dr. West left the Green Party, yes, that leaves room for another person who is on the left to run through the Green Party. So that's something you guys have to keep in mind. This is another reason why some people weren't happy, when he left the Green Party. But I think Dr. West did the best decision that he thinks is best for him and his campaign. But yes, the Green Party is going to run a candidate for president. I don't ever remember them not running a presidential candidate as long as I've been an adult. So this is the world that we live in. This is how it works. So yes, obviously there are some people on the left who are going to support Cornel West. There are some people on the left that are going to support Jill Stein. And then it could be somewhere in between, right? Now, this issue with Israel and Palestine, because Jill released multiple videos today, she is calling for an investigation into the Joe Biden administration, particularly in reference to this issue with Israel and Palestine. And I want you to see the video that she released for that subject. Listen to this.
I want to speak to the massacre now taking place before our eyes in Gaza. I speak as someone who deplores violence in all its forms and condemns violence against civilians of any nation. The war crimes being perpetrated by Netanyahu against Palestinians, however, are in a league of their own and have reached genocidal proportions, with Palestinians denied food, water, medicine, and electricity, while being relentlessly bombed as they're forced to flee their homes, running for their lives. President Biden and bipartisan leaders are not only complicit, they are full partners in Netanyahu's war crimes, supplying the bombs raining down on Gaza, the airplanes dropping them, the aircraft carriers defending the Israeli military, $10 million a day to strengthen the IDF, and propaganda to run political interference. The U.S. role in blocking a UN ceasefire resolution is absolutely unforgivable. We call for an investigation of the Netanyahu regime's war crimes, as well as the role of Biden and U.S. leaders in aiding and abetting them.
I feel this is a really good point. I do feel like if you are a left candidate, I think calling this out, calling for that type of investigation, considering what's happening right now, I think that is the right way to go. I think it's smart of Jill to do that because what she's doing is she's showing that it's not just Netanyahu, obviously. It's not just the IDF. It is also the fact that this is Joe Biden's administration that is funding the atrocities that are happening to the Palestinian people on the Gaza Strip. And this is something that if I were a candidate, this is something that I would call out for the people saying back Joe Biden no matter what. We can't afford to lose. This is something I would call out. If you are concerned and you're upset about what's happening to the Palestinian people, and I know most of you guys watching are, why would you vote for Joe Biden? Why would you? Why would you vote for Donald Trump? Why would you? Both of them are going to do the same when it comes to Israel. Both of them are going to continue to fund Israel and fund Israel's war crimes. So calling out the Biden administration, I think, is very smart. And I noticed like some people are saying, well, she started this race late in the game. People are like, why is she just doing this now? Well, remember, again, like I said, the Green Party did have a candidate with Dr. West until actually recently. It hasn't been that long. So here we go, So the thing is that I kind of see it as this way. The same thing that JB said. I say the more third party and independent candidates, the better. I feel the same way. Because look at what is happening now, and I'm going to point this out. Some of the most popular people are running outside of the duopoly. Dr. West, Dr. Jill Stein, RFK Jr. These are some of the most popular people, and they're not running in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. Imagine if someone like Marianne Williamson also decided to, I don't think she's going to. Her polling numbers went up, so I don't think she's going to. What if she left the Democratic Party as well? What I'm saying is that this can be the time to have a multi-party, I don't know, what do we call it? A multi-party extravaganza in this country going into 2024. This could be that moment. I don't remember this in my adult life, this happening where it's this many people running outside the duopoly, and all these people are pretty popular. So this could be the moment to fully disrupt the duopoly. Let's continue with this video here.
And above all, these crimes must stop now. As a Jew who grew up just after the Holocaust, with relatives who fled pogroms and a grandfather named Israel, I take never again seriously, and that means never again for anyone. For all those reasons, we demand a ceasefire, an end to the blockade, humanitarian and medical relief, release of hostages and political prisoners, and an end to occupation and apartheid. This is the only path to peace and security for us all.
Okay. So another thing that I want to add as well, pull up this here for just a second. She did release a press release in reference to her announcement as well. But one thing I do want to say really quick, we'll put this over to the side. The issue has come up again about Peter Dow. So some of the people on social media, they were like, oh my God, was this to sabotage Dr. West's campaign? Because Dr. Jill Stein was the one who recommended Peter Dow. But at the end of the day, Dr. West made the decision to hire Peter Dow. It wasn't forced upon him. I think Dr. West is a very intelligent man. I think he knows how to think for himself. So let's be real here for a second. And two, again, if Dr. West stayed in the Green Party, this run with Jill Stein would not be happening right now. But the Green Party does have to run someone. So if it wasn't Jill Stein, it was going to be someone else. I hate to say it, but it could have been Howie Hawkins. It could have been Howie Hawkins again. So I think it's important that we have to be careful, especially those of us on the left. We have to be careful that the left doesn't eat itself. And I think this is something that I notice happening. I feel like sometimes on the left, we're so used to being negative, contrarian, hesitant, doubtful, because we all got burned by Bernie and the squad. And I think because we're used to that sometimes, I think that it can be really difficult for us to say, hey, this could be a win. I think it's hard for us to do that. I think we're hesitant to do that because we're just so used to being screwed over. But I think that having more candidates run outside the two-party system, I think that's a win for us and those of us who are done with this duopoly. Now, I want to go into this press release here. It says Jill Stein announces 2024 Green Party presidential run. Jill Stein announced today that she is seeking the Green Party nomination for president of the United States. Stein is a Harvard-educated doctor, a pioneering environmental health advocate, and a longtime organizer for People, Planet, and Peace. Says Stein of her mission in 2024, I'm running for president to offer a better choice for people outside the failed two-party system. We'll put a pro-worker, anti-war climate emergency agenda front and center in this election and on the ballot in November. Stein comes as an unprecedented moment in modern electoral politics with an unsettled electorate and a commanding majority of Americans expressing a desire for a presidential candidate outside the duopoly. According to a recent Gallup poll, 63% of U.S. adults currently agree with the statement that the Republican and the Democratic parties do such a poor job of representing the American people that a third major party is needed. This represents a 70% percentage point increase from a year ago and is the highest since Gallup first asked the question in 2003. With the war machine swallowing trillions of dollars as working people struggle to survive and climate crisis accelerates, it's time to offer voters a viable alternative to the bought-off politicians who have thrown them under the bus, said Stein. The ruling parties that got us into this mess aren't getting us out. Both Democrats and Republicans have betrayed their promises again and again. Political insiders always smear outsiders like us and try to shame voters who want better choices. But without freedom of choice in elections, there is no democracy. It's time to offer the American people a real choice on the ballot, independent of the failed establishment. Dr. Stein unveiled a campaign website at jillstein2024.com, laying out the campaign's vision to solve the key crisis of our time: crushing inequality, endless war, and climate collapse. When we stand together, we can provide living wage jobs for all Americans. We can guarantee an economic bill of rights with the right to a job, healthcare, housing, food, education, and more. We can abolish student debt and medical debt. We can create a Green New Deal with millions of jobs to fight the climate crisis and protect Mother Earth. We can ensure constitutional rights, freedoms, and justice for all. We can end endless war and rampant militarism and use diplomacy and international law to end violence, occupation, and apartheid. We can build real democracy to empower the people. We do have the power, and we can use it in this election to start building an America and a world that works for all of us. That's the press release. So one thing that I do want to add as well, we've talked about some of the pros. We talked about some of the cons. Obviously, running third party is not easy. But that being said, Jill Stein has done this before, so she knows what to expect. This time around, she's going to know how to handle the criticism that is going to come from neoliberal media, of course. You know they're going to come after Jill like they have before, but she's been through this before, so she knows how to deal with it. Now, I want to go to the website, because there is something I did want to point out. Here's the website, Jill 2024, People, Planet, and Peace. So we're going to look at the principles. So this is the platform. So a just economy. We need an economy that works for all of us, not just the wealthy and powerful. To reverse surging inequality and insecurity, we need an economic bill of rights, including the right to a living wage job, housing, food, healthcare, education, and more, so that all of us are guaranteed the basic security for a good life. A Green New Deal, from record heat waves and wildfires to devastating hurricanes, droughts, and floods. The warning signs are clear. We must take decisive action now to fight runaway global heating and prevent the worst case scenario of climate collapse. We need a Green New Deal with massive investment in green jobs, industries, and technologies to revitalize the American economy, improve our quality of life, protect our planet, and safeguard our children's future. Freedom, equality, and justice for all. America's cherished ideals of liberty and justice, yet countless millions are still fighting for basic rights. We must put an end to shameful legacy of systemic discrimination against women, Black and brown people, Indigenous people, immigrants, people with disabilities, the LGBTQIA+ community, and other marginalized groups, and come together to ensure our rights, freedoms, and justice for all. Peace and global human rights. The bipartisan endless war machine enriches military contractors, lobbyists, and politicians while it fuels devastation around the world and impoverishes the American people. We must end the endless wars and create a new foreign policy based on diplomacy, international law, and human rights to oppose violence, occupation, and apartheid. And real democracy to empower the people. Our democracy is on life support. Belief in our political system is at historic lows, and the number of Americans who feel that neither establishment party represents them is at a record high. We need to revive our democracy with a full spectrum of reforms to empower the people, including real choice on the ballot, because without freedom of choice in elections, there's no democracy. Now, here's one thing I do want to point out. I think, and this is the same thing I said to Dr. West, and he has changed his website. I think bullet points are best, right? So when I spoke to Dr. West, I said the same thing. I said, what you have on the website is great, but the reality is we live in a TikTok generation. We live in a Twitter generation where people only want to read a certain amount of characters. It's easier for people if there are bullet points they can just go to and see boom, 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 boom. This is how you feel about these issues. This is your platform. So that's one thing that I would recommend. And two, I would give the same advice I gave to Dr. West, which is to provide more detail, specifics. So when you say, for example, a just economy, and you mentioned economic bill of rights, healthcare, education, living wage, how much of a living wage? How much do you think is a living wage? And I say this because, for example, on Dr. West's website, he said $27 an hour minimum wage, which is an adjustment for those that live in regional areas that have a higher cost of living. Those kinds of things I think are important. That's just me. If I'm looking at a campaign website, I like to see like the bullet points, like boom, 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 and have a little bit more detail, I would say. Now, that being said, the website has just been posted. There could be edits made to this, just like there was with Dr. West's website as well. So I would point that out. And then the other thing that I do want to point out is, and this must be the standard, but when I speak to Jill on Sunday, I will tell her about this as well. The donate options. So same thing I said with Dr. West. When people who are working class, if we see that there's an option to donate $3,300, that makes people who are working class less likely to donate. One of the ways that Bernie Sanders was able to raise so much money was off of those small dollar donations, the $27. In fact, when I was on that Bernie train, when I donated to Bernie, that was what I donated. Every time I donated to Bernie, I clicked the $27 thing every time. But if people see that there's an option for $3,300 donation, that can turn working class people off, because that tells them, okay, if someone's going to give you that much, then why should I donate my $10? But I'm starting to wonder, and I'll ask Jill on Sunday if this is just the standard template, because her website has this, Cornel West's website has this as well. So that's something that I would ask Jill as well. But now there is another person who is in this race that's running outside of the duopoly. And one of the things I noticed too is that what's funny to me is sometimes I think people just don't want to trust anything now, because some of the same people, when Dr. West announced, some people said they wish it was Jill Stein running instead. Now that Jill Stein is running, some of those same people are like, I don't trust it. So it's just, I think some people have just become very hesitant with this altogether. Again, being screwed over by Bernie, being screwed over by the squad, etc. So I do think that is what is making some people just kind of look at everything with the side eye. But I will say this, for those of you that are planning on or were planning on staying home and not participating in 2024 election, but before you were thinking about going out, voting for third party or independent, I say it like this, dude. 2024 really could be the time when we could have third party and independent candidates really disrupt the duopoly like never before. And I don't mean, what CNN pundits say that Jill Stein cost Hillary Clinton the election. I don't mean that. I'm talking about, which is bullshit, by the way. I don't mean that. I mean disrupting it to the point, which I think could happen this time around, disrupting it to the point where it's not just about Joe Biden losing. It's about making it tough and difficult for Biden and Donald Trump. We'll have to wait and see. We will have to wait and see. But Jill Stein will be here Sunday, 5 p.m. Eastern time. Don't forget that. So tune in. I'm going to go to some of the comments here. Yes, Cowboy broke Twitter. Yeah, like you ever heard someone say like so-and-so's video broke the internet? That's kind of what I meant. That it was so popular that happened. Thank you for the super chat, David. West, De La Cruz, and now Stein running is exciting, even though these are separate campaigns. Is there a path to collab given their similarities? That's a good question as well. Who knows what could happen next year? You know, we don't know. We don't know. Maybe it could come down to polling numbers. Maybe if one of them is polling higher than the other, maybe there could be an option to collab, but I can't really speak for them. JB says, I say the more third party and independent candidates, the better. That's right. I read that already. Thank you, M. Smith. Better late than never. No to World War III. Thank you for the super chat, Willis. Black people need to be independent voters going forward. Yes. Thank you for saying that, Willis. Yes. I'm a registered independent. Like, honestly, if you haven't left the Democratic Party, leave the Democratic Party. I left the Democratic Party. Thank you for the super chat, Jay. Jill Stein announces a run for president and Joe Manchin's not running for re-election. Today has been full of good news. I know. I heard about the Joe Manchin story as well. Thank you for this as well, Willis. No reparations, no votes, no tangibles, no vote. The Green Party supports reparations. That's another thing I think Jill should specify on her platform. And thank you for the super chat, Roger. If you're hesitant, then vote for ballot initiatives. That's all. I'll take those comments on Rockfin, Corey. Thank you. All right. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Bert. Thank you, Sabs and Eric. Thank you for the tip, JVB. Thanks, Sabby. And thank you for the tip, Roger. Sabs, I'm not buying this one bit. I think this was a setup from the jump. I think Jill was part of it. I think she always wanted to run again, saying I won't run as long as West is running. Okay, let me throw Dow his way, F up his campaign, then I can step in. I disagree with that, Roger. I honestly disagree with that. Again, Jill Stein was backing Cornel West's campaign when he was in the Green Party. I mean, not everybody is sinister, Roger. This is what I was talking about. Not everybody is thinking that way. Goes on to say, also, I wouldn't necessarily call West popular. RFK may be use of the, like, you mean because of the Kennedy name. I asked random apolitical people if they know West. All said no. RFK said, yes. That's interesting because it's been the opposite for me. That's interesting because when I ask people if they know RFK, they've pointed out the wrong Kennedy. That's another thing too. So that could be part of it as well. All right. We're going to go ahead and get into this story about Max Blumenthal. If you have not seen this, hold on. So Max Blumenthal actually had questions for the State Department about the genocide issue. And I think he makes a great comparison here. And I'm actually going to connect this to the statement that Anna Kasparian made recently, because there is a connection. So let's get started with this clip here from Max Blumenthal. It says the Gray Zone's Max Blumenthal asked the State Department why Tony Blinken and Joe Biden have accused nations of genocide, which have killed far less than Israel has in Gaza in 1 month. So listen to this. This is a good question.
And in March 2021, Secretary Blinken accused China of the crime of genocide for its alleged treatment of the Uyghur minority, but he didn't accuse them of killing on any mass scale or forcible transfer. Now we see with Israel's military assault on Gaza, something like every 200 people in the Gaza Strip has been eliminated. Over 4,000 children killed. The Ministry of Intelligence, as Sam pointed out, in Israel has published a blueprint for the forced transfer of the entire Palestinian population to Egypt. We have the intent to commit genocide expressed at the highest level of the Israeli government, including Netanyahu himself referring to the Palestinian population as Amalek.
Let's pause here and let's go back to the part here about the Uyghurs, because this piece right here is very important.
Of the Uyghur minority, but he didn't accuse them of killing on any mass scale or forcible transfer. Now we see with Israel's military assault on Gaza, something like every 200 people in the Gaza Strip has been eliminated. Over 4,000 children killed. The Ministry of Intelligence, as Sam pointed out, in Israel has published a blueprint for the forced transfer of the entire Palestinian population to Egypt. We have the intent to commit genocide expressed at the highest level of the Israeli government, including Netanyahu himself referring to the Palestinian population as Amalek.
Okay, let me just point out what he's talking about there. I think it was probably almost 2 years ago now. I think it was almost 2 years ago was the first time I talked about the Uyghurs. This was a population in China where the U.S. government said that China had committed genocide against the Uyghur people. At that point in time, I showed on the show the statement from the State Department in China, and the State Department was basically saying that there was no evidence of proof or to prove that genocide of the Uyghurs was actually taking place. I've actually interviewed independent journalists that have covered this story as well. And they also said, like, don't you think if there was a genocide, people would have heard about this, that kind of thing. To Max's point, the fact that the Biden administration or the State Department was willing to point out the fact that there is this supposed genocide of the Uyghur people in China, but they're not willing to do that in reference to the Palestinians in Gaza, it's very telling. And my assumption is because the United States backs Israel unequivocally and has unwavering support, as they've said, for Israel, that's part of it. They're connected in reference to Israeli intelligence. They're connected in reference to, oil, the money that's sent to Israel, et cetera. But when it comes to China, the U.S. government doesn't consider China to be an ally. So it's easier for them to say that there is a genocide that's being committed against the Uyghur people, and China's doing this because that is someone that the U.S. government sees as the enemy, not as an ally. But when it's a country that the U.S. government sees as an ally and the U.S. government feels like they actually need, they're not going to be willing to come forward and make that same statement. That's my assumption about this. But this is a great point that Max is bringing up, and he's bringing up examples that point to just that the plan is a genocide of Palestinian people.
Level of the Israeli government, including Netanyahu himself, referring to the Palestinian population as Amalek, the biblical Amalek. So I wonder, when you're accusing one country of genocide without accusing them of mass killing, and then blocking ceasefires to enable another country's military assault, what metric are you using to determine genocide, or is this just political rhetoric?
It's certainly.
So the question is, what metric are you using to determine whether or not genocide is actually happening? And then this also brings up the issue with the UN, because the UN and other human rights organizations have repeatedly, as far as I've seen over the past couple years, have called out the dire situation that the Palestinian people are enduring in Gaza multiple times. They said this is a humanitarian crisis. The director of the UN chapter in New York actually resigned because of the killing of the Palestinian people. And he stated a long letter explicitly what was happening to those people. So this is just something to keep in mind, that there have been multiple organizations and other agencies that have said this is what is happening to the Palestinian people. And there is evidence and there are reports, and the US government still will not say that this is a genocide that's happening to them. So Max asked, what are the metrics?
Genocide, or is this just political rhetoric?
It's certainly not political rhetoric. The department, and I talked a little bit about this yesterday, we have a rigorous process in place for evaluating whether something constitutes as genocide or not. And
what is the process? He said they have a rigorous process that is in place, whether or not something constitutes as a genocide or not. What's the process? And where can we find this information? Those of us, the American people, where can we find this information so we can review this process for ourselves? I feel like that should be public information.
And that is true in any country that that situation might be being looked at. That is not a term that we have assessed pertains to this current conflict. We are, of course, monitoring the evolving situation and are examining facts as they develop. This continues to be an incredibly challenging and fraught situation, but it's also important to remember that Hamas bears responsibility for sparking this war. They have brought this tragic war to Gaza.
Okay, well, President.
So the first mistake that he made is he's bringing this back to October 7th as though this started on October 7th. That's the first mistake that this gentleman is making. He's just going to ignore all the humanitarian issues that have happened to the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip before October 7th. And all of them are doing this, by the way. All of them are doing these talking points because they don't want to have to answer to what the state of Israel did to the Palestinian people prior to October 7th. So there's that. Just keeping it real. That is not Sagar. You guys are funny. Casey, come on. Stop. Oh, man. But this is something that I'm noticing repeatedly that they just continue to do. Let's just, start on October 7th. And I want to ask you a question. Let's pretend it was the other way around. If it were 10,000 Israelis that were killed, would the U.S. government consider that to be a genocide? And if so, if that's the case, then that means that they value one group of people over the other, which is essentially what is happening.
Biden has accused the Russian government of genocide for its actions in Ukraine, where in 2 years it has killed as many civilians as Israel has killed in 1 month in the Gaza Strip. So how do you account for that disparity where you're assisting one country and accusing the other of genocide when the country you're assisting has systematically killed so many more people in 1 month?
Those circumstances are totally and completely not the same, and to make a comparison like that, candidly, is incredibly inappropriate.
Yeah, they're not the same because one example in reference to Ukraine involves killing European people, and the other example involves killing brown people who just happen to be, most of them happen to be Muslim. Like, I can't unsee this thing now that since you said this, you guys, since you said the Sagar thing, I can't unsee this. This is bad.
Circumstances are totally and completely not the same, and to make a comparison like that, candidly, is incredibly inappropriate. We have been, please don't interrupt me. We have been, have raised directly with the Israeli government about the need to distinguish between Hamas terrorists and Palestinian civilians. This is something that the secretary has raised directly on his travels. We even laid out that we believe that there are commitments that can be made additionally on dealing with protecting civilian life more effectively. And we're watching very closely to make sure that happens.
But you've referred to Palestinian civilians as human shields. Doesn't that blur the distinction between civilians and militants?
We have not referred to Palestinian civilians as human shields. We have said
that is a lie. That is a blatant lie. How many times have you seen them, the State Department, and remember, mainstream media repeats the talking points from the State Department. How many times have you seen them use that exact phrase? How many times have you seen our politicians use that exact phrase in interviews, that they're using these people as human shields? How many times? This is a blatant lie. We're going to call him Dime Store Sagar. Can we call him that, since you guys pointed out he looks like a fake Sagar? We're going to call Dime Store Sagar is blatantly lying here.
Human shields. Doesn't that blur the distinction between civilians and militants?
We have not referred to Palestinian civilians as human shields. We have said that Hamas is using Palestinian civilians as human shields. That is not hyperbole. That is something that we have seen Hamas do as they continue to integrate themselves into key civilian infrastructure.
They've actually seen them do this. They've actually seen them do that.
Across Gaza.
Wouldn't that be blurring the distinction between civilians and combatants? If you say Hamas is using civilians as human shields, wouldn't that be in some ways justifying the killing of civilians because they happen to be in the way,
we are not
in
justifying.
their homes?
There is no one in this administration that is justifying killing of civilians.
That's a damn lie. That is a damn lie. That is a lie. We have heard that from multiple politicians, you guys. This is a mess. This is a mess. Dime store saga.
There is no one in this administration that is justifying killing of civilians. Any civilian life lost is incredibly troubling, heartbreaking to us. Any number above 0 is deeply troubling to us. What we are doing.
If the loss of civilians was deeply troubling to them, they would call for a ceasefire. The loss of those civilians is not deeply troubling to them. They care more about the Israeli civilians than they do about the Palestinian ones. And that's a fact. That's a fact. Look at the way they just censured, and I had many criticisms of Rashida Tlaib, but look at the way they just censured Rashida Tlaib, who's the only Palestinian in Congress. Look at how they did that. But yet, at the same time, the other congressman who was on Fox News and said, we need to level it into a parking lot. They all need to go. That guy isn't censured. So it's very obvious. They care about certain types of people other than the Palestinian people. And it's very clear. It's very clear. So they don't value civilian lives of Palestinians.
To us, any number above 0 is deeply troubling to us. What we are doing is we are working with our Israeli partners to ensure that steps can be taken to minimize the impact on civilian life. And we also have believed that there is a moral imperative, there is a strategic imperative to take steps to minimize loss of civilian life. I'm going to work through them. I've answered like 4 of your questions. You could.
Dime store saga. Now, I want to connect this to the Anna Kasparian statement that she made, because this brings up another issue in reference to genocide. Different group of people, different situation, but this is Anna, screaming about how she will not vote for Joe Biden in 2024. But I'm going to connect this to what Max Blumenthal said in reference to whether or not you declare something to be a genocide or not. Listen to this.
The George W. Bush administration condemned the Israeli government for doing an airstrike in Gaza that took out 1 Hamas militant but killed 14 other civilians. Think about how disgusting and devolved our country has gotten, where Joe Biden can't outdo the war criminal George W. Bush, where George W. Bush has more morality than Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a disgrace. An absolute disgrace. I will not be voting for Joe Biden under any circumstance. I don't care about any other policy that he has championed. I cannot, as an Armenian American, support a president who has greenlit the ethnic cleansing and genocide of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. This, for me, is the red line.
Okay, we'll come back to that in a second. Let me just say something about the Armenian bit. So for those who may not have realized, I've known this, but Anna Kasparian is Armenian. Now, why am I connecting this to the Max Blumenthal story? Because there was a little event called the Armenian Genocide. Why am I bringing that up? Because it wasn't until 2019 when the US government finally decided to acknowledge the Armenian genocide. 2019. When Joe Biden assumed office in 2021, Joe Biden also agreed that, yes, there was an Armenian genocide. Do you see how long this took for this to happen? But the US government acknowledged it in 2019. Joe Biden wasn't even president in 2019, which means the acknowledgement happened under the Trump administration. So for Anna, this situation is a little bit more personal than it may be for others. This did happen to the Armenian people. That's also why if you pay attention, you notice you don't see as many Armenians. In Massachusetts, there is a town called Watertown. Not making this up. It's very funny, I know. Some of you may know about it because of the Boston Marathon bomber. That's where he was hiding at. That's a whole nother story. We'll do that another night. Watertown, Massachusetts actually has an Armenian museum. There aren't as many Armenians that live there now, but there used to be more. Like there was, a large Armenian community that lived in Watertown, Massachusetts. And the thing is that people got to understand is people that come from these populations where they've had entire family lines obliterated, this is personal for people like Anna. Now, reference to the voting for Joe Biden part, we'll have to see in 2024 because, Anna, she flip-flopped, she might say one thing now and then next year, different story. But the connection also to the George Bush issue. Let's hear that part again. This is important.
Bush administration condemned the Israeli government for doing an airstrike in Gaza that took out one Hamas militant but killed 14 other civilians.
That was under War Hawk George W. Bush. And look at where we are today. We have a Democrat president. The Democratic Party is supposed to be less war hawkish, but they're not. That's what's happening. That's what's happening now. What we have are two war parties.
Think about how disgusting and devolved our country has gotten, where Joe Biden can't outdo the war criminal George W. Bush, where George W. Bush has more morality than Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. I will not be voting for Joe Biden under any circumstance. I don't care about any other policy that he has championed. I cannot, as an Armenian American, support a president who has greenlit the ethnic cleansing and genocide of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. This, for me, is the red line.
So for me, there were other things that, when I talk about red line issues, one of the issues with me was the Israel issue. And I've said this on multiple shows. I've said it on this show as well. Even before October 7th, I even said this last year on another podcast. I said, no. If you don't get that issue right, I'm not voting for you, period. Now, again, we'll have to see if Anna sticks by that. We'll have to see if she stands by that because she may not. It is TYT. But I think it says something for even a co-host of TYT, which is very much Democrat, a co-host of TYT to say they're not going to vote for Joe Biden. And you compare that to people who were to the left of TYT saying that Joe Biden's doing a good job. We don't have to name any names. You guys can figure it out. You guys can figure it out. Peace Dove said Armenians from Massachusetts all moved to Fresno, California. That's interesting. Interesting. I wonder why Fresno. Why Fresno? Interesting. But I think Venti Cafe. All right. So when you compare what Anna said to what Kyle Kalinski's been saying, I don't know. Maybe she may be on her way out. But the point is this. We had the Armenian genocide. We had the genocide of the Palestinian people. And there was the State Department confirmation that there was a genocide against the Uyghur people. But notice which one they're not willing to acknowledge. They acknowledge that there was Armenian genocide. They acknowledge that there's a Uyghur genocide, although, like I said, the State Department had said before that evidence does not support that, but they were not acknowledged that there is a genocide that is happening to the Palestinian people, and over 10,000 people have been killed, a lot of them children. Something to think about. Going to go to some of the comments here, and then we'll go to the next story. JB said, new discoveries of natural... Oh, I saw this already. Sorry about that. There was no Uyghur genocide. Right. That's what they said. That's what I was telling people. But our government is willing to say that there was. Deborah says we have an Armenian enclave in Detroit / Metro Detroit. Interesting. Whose dad said, don't get me wrong, I'm glad she called Biden out on this. Yeah. I wonder if she'll be leaving TYT soon. Probably, huh? Maybe she on her way out. We're going to get to some good news tonight. You know, there were some wins that did happen on the local level that really changes the game. And this goes back to what I've said before, that when it comes to the local level, you have a better chance of implementing real change on the local and the state level than you do on the national level, especially if you live in a state that has ballot measures. We're going to start with Ohio, which did have a huge win, 2 huge wins. Shout out to my people in Ohio. I know some of you are in Ohio. Shout out to you guys. You had 2 huge wins the other day. Let's go ahead and get into it.
Voters in 12 states across the U.S. have cast their ballots in local and state elections with closely watched races in Kentucky, Mississippi, Virginia, and Ohio. CBS News projects that voters in Ohio have chosen to enshrine the right to abortion in the state by just over 57% to 42%.
Pause. Look at the percentage totals, you guys. In Ohio, Ohio is a red state. 57.6% said yes to protect the right for a woman to choose, and 42.4% said no. What this shows you is that, once again, when you put the policies directly in front of the voters and not rely on representatives to get these things done for you, you actually see how the constituents feel about these issues. This is a red state. And this is another thing I've said before too, because Trump didn't really want to get into the whole what kind of policy he would have in reference to a woman's right to choose in the interview that he had, a couple interviews that he had, and the town hall. But the thing is this, it has gotten to the point now where some Republicans do not disagree with the woman's right to choose. Things have changed. And that's the thing. If you look at the polls, it shows you it's not just Democrats who agree with the woman's right to choose. And some of the Democrats are against it. Some of those people are in Congress that are against it. So put it on the ballot and let the voters decide what they want to happen in their state. This is why we push ballot initiatives a lot. And we try to encourage people to localize in your area. This is why. Organize within your area. So that's one of them. But there's another one. Let's finish this one.
The issue amends the state's constitution to protect the, quote, right to make and carry out one's own reproductive decisions, including on abortion. Now, voters in Ohio also voted to legalize recreational marijuana. And in Kentucky's governor race, Democrat incumbent Andy Beshear is also projected to win re-election, defeating his Republican challenger, Daniel Cameron.
Pause. So the other win, and I have another video I'm going to go into in reference to this, Ohio just legalized recreational marijuana. Last year, it was Missouri. You see, the Midwest is starting to spread. I told you, all it takes is for one state in that region to get it done, and then it can spread like wildfire. Last year, it was Missouri. This year, it's Ohio. So think about the states that are in between Missouri and Ohio, and I wonder how that's going to go. Again, red state. Red state. This happened. Kentucky governor race. Beshear wins. The governor, Andy Beshear, won re-election, 52.9%, versus Daniel Cameron, who's a Republican, 47%. So something is happening in Ohio. If those of you watching live in Ohio, let me know what you think is going on. Because remember, Trump won Ohio. Obama had won Ohio at one point. At one point, Ohio was considered to be a swing state, but then it obviously became a red state. Something is happening in Ohio. Something is shifting. And so that will be interesting come 2024 presidential election. That'll be interesting. Not saying that Joe Biden can win Ohio, though. There is still the thing with him being the candidate. Not saying that he can win it, but something is happening, at least on the local level in Ohio. They're starting to vote more for these policies that the Democratic Party would favor.
Voters in Mississippi will also determine their next state governor. So let's take a closer look at the Ohio results. It was a decisive victory for the campaign to protect reproductive rights in Ohio, and it comes more than a year after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the nationwide right to have an abortion. Ohio is now the 7th U.S. state to protect abortion rights in its state constitution, following the Dobbs ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade. Ohio will now avoid the implementation of a law that would have outlawed abortions after about 6 weeks, with no exceptions for rape or incest. Now, President Biden celebrated the abortion rights win, saying, "Tonight, Americans once again voted to protect their fundamental freedoms, and democracy won. My administration will continue to protect access to reproductive health care and call on Congress to restore the protection."
Pause. I wanted to show you something here. My administration will continue to protect access to reproductive health care. The word I want you to focus on is access. Because technically, you already have access to it. It's just whether or not you can afford it. You can walk into a hospital. There's no one standing outside the hospital doors to block you from coming in and say, "Do you have insurance?" They will ask you when you get to the counter, but you can walk into the emergency room. You can walk into a clinic. So don't you have access? The question is, can you pay for it? Can you afford it? So I wanted to show you that. So what they're going to try to do, and particularly Joe Biden, they're going to try to run on a woman's right to choose to solidify Joe Biden's reelection, because there's nothing else he can really run on. You don't need to run on the infrastructure bill. Nobody's paying attention to that. Infrastructure bill doesn't put food on the table for American people. It's not putting a roof over people's heads. The homeless rate increased under Joe Biden's presidency. So these things, these wins that they're talking about with Joe Biden, that's not going to work on the American people, particularly those who are working class and those who are struggling. So I think what he's going to try to do is he's going to try to run on this issue.
Of Roe v. Wade in federal law once and for all. And for more on the Ohio result, let's go now to Karen Kassler, who is the bureau chief at the Ohio State House News Bureau. She's joining us with the very latest on this story. Very good to have you on the show again. So voters enshrining the right to an abortion in the Constitution, and this was a pretty clear result. What did you make of it?
I think what's interesting here is that this is the second election basically where voters have been asked about something that relates to abortion. In August, there was an amendment that was put forward that would have made it harder to pass future amendments like this one. And it was clearly targeted at this amendment coming up in November. That amendment failed, but abortion was a key part of that. And so that kind of set the stage for this amendment. And to have both of these, abortion rights and legalization of recreational marijuana, on the same ballot was quite interesting as well. We had no statewide candidates. These were the two statewide issues. And so it was interesting to see what voters did with them, and they passed them both pretty soundly.
So if we
Okay, now we're going to move on to the legalize it issue. Ohio voters approve legalization of marijuana. Check this out.
Priscilla, let's touch on another issue here. It didn't get as much attention as abortion, but in Ohio, we have the legalization of recreational marijuana, the 24th state to do that. What's the significance of that?
Look at the numbers. 57% said yes, 43% said no. Oh, and by the way, to the nose, and I don't even smoke, by the way, but to the nose, you guys are ridiculous. No one's saying you have to do it. No one's saying that you have to puff, pass. But this is just ridiculous. That's what. No, for what? What are you afraid of? What are you scared of? Let's go on.
Yeah, Joe, it's huge because this is a state that is considered conservative, red-leaning, that has voted to legalize marijuana, with 57% of voters making that choice and voting in favor of that. And again, it may be a lesson on messaging, because what the advocates for that said was that this is just like alcohol and we should regulate it and we should tax it just like alcohol. And as I was at the polls yesterday talking to folks, a lot of people seem to agree with that. Now, that's not to say that this is working everywhere. We saw last year in Oklahoma a measure like this failed, but it is going to be on the ballot in 2024 in a number of those kinds of states, Florida, Nebraska, South Dakota, among others. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out there as well. Joe.
So for those of you, if you heard those states, if you live in Florida, Nebraska, Oklahoma, that's coming your way next year for your ballot measures. So when I start the ballot measures for 2024, you'll get to see which other states are going to have that on the ballot. So just FYI. The other thing interesting too is I noticed she pointed out the fact that this is interesting because it's a red state. Newsflash, Republicans smoke too. Listen, I went to college in the South where a lot of the people were conservative and they smoke too. Okay, so let's just, this is not a Democrat thing. This is not a Republican thing, but it's an everybody thing. Everybody. Everybody. I want to get to this article here, and then I'm going to show you how this guy tries to, on Newsmax, he's really angry that the voters got what they wanted. Boy, I tell you, people are something. It says abortion right advocates win major victories in Ohio, Kentucky, and Virginia. Abortion right advocates won major victories Tuesday as voters in conservative-leaning Ohio decisively passed a constitutional amendment guaranteeing access to abortion, while those in ruby red Kentucky re-elected a Democratic governor who aggressively attacked his opponent for supporting the state's near-total ban on procedure. And this is going to be the lose-lose for Republicans, by the way. The ones who are going so far to the extreme where they want to do a total ban, period, regardless of the situation, regardless of the number of weeks, those people are losing. So if you didn't hear it before, you heard it here. And if there's any other Republican candidates, I might do part of the Republican debate on Sunday. I haven't had time to watch all of it. But if there's any of them that are wanting to do like this total ban thing or whatever, that is not a winning point. I feel like some of the people that are running, they tried to be Trump 2.0. Like, let's be like Trump, but let's be like twice as hard, right? And I don't think that's going to work. So everyone pay attention to that. And then another piece here in Virginia, a battleground state where Republicans pushed a proposal to outlaw abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Democrats were projected to take control of the state legislature after campaigning heavily on preserving access. So this is what I'm trying to tell you. And this is the thing for the Republican candidates that are going to try to run on it that way. That's not a winner. That's not a winner. Now, this gentleman is not happy that voters actually had direct democracy on Newsmax. Listen to this. He's upset the voters actually got direct democracy.
And you put very sexy things like abortion and marijuana on the ballot, and a lot of young people come out and vote. It was a secret sauce for disaster in Ohio. I don't know what they were thinking, but that's why I thank goodness that most of the states in this country don't allow you to put everything on the ballot, because pure democracies are not the way to run a country.
So then you're.
And you put very sexy things like abortion and marijuana on the ballot, and a lot of young people come out and vote.
I don't know about you guys, but I never considered abortion to be sexy. So there's that. I think this is Santorium. Is this Santorum? Santorium? I forget how to pronounce his name. I think this is him. Santorum? Yeah. So I don't consider that to be a sexy thing. So there's that.
It was a secret sauce for disaster in Ohio. I don't know what they were thinking, but that's why I thank goodness that most of the states in this country don't allow you to put everything on the ballot because.
Right. In other words, what he's saying is he's happy that most of the states in this country are not ballot initiative states, that they don't have ballot measures. Wait for it.
Because pure democracies are not the way to run a country.
So then you're
and
pure democracy are not ways to run a country. Did you guys hear what he just said? Because the way that he wants the country to function is he want the representatives to be the ones to make all the decisions. But the representatives are supposed to represent their constituents, but they don't. He doesn't want the voters to actually have a say. Did everybody pay attention to what he just said? Dude, the marijuana thing, that's like a deal breaker, bud. That's like a deal breaker. Like some of these old school like thinkers, old school politicians, they're so stuck in their ways that they don't realize that their party and their constituents and the people around them have evolved, and they have not. They're still talking like it's 1991. They still don't realize the Bush days are gone. They just don't get it. They don't realize that more people have started to lean towards populism. They don't get this. They really don't. He doesn't want the voters to actually have a say so. Quiet part out loud. Interesting, huh? I'm gonna go to these comments here. Thank you for the super sticker, Lorez. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sparky, an Armenian refugee who survived the Armenian genocide along with her San Francisco bosses, invented rice-a-roni. No genocide, no rice-a-roni. Maybe Israel's thinking about that. Interesting. Thank you, none of your business. Abortion used as a wedge is that keeps parties in power. Yeah, it is something that both parties for a while have been able to just fall back on, right? So the Democratic Party could have codified Roe v. Wade into law decades ago, but they decided not to. A card they can pull out of their back pocket and use it when they're desperate so that they can get reelected. Thank you for the super sticker, Fenian. Amanda says, I'm from Ohio and I voted for both. I think people here are tired of being told how we have to live and losing our freedoms through legislation we don't have a say in. Ohio had its chance to speak. All right. Shout out to Amanda. All right, guys. That is it for me tonight. I am actually not going to be live tomorrow night. I have an outpatient procedure tomorrow morning. So they have to put Sabby to sleep, and Sabby's going to be a little out of it probably for a while. So I will not be live tomorrow night, but I will be back Sunday with Dr. Jill Stein. Don't miss that. She's going to talk about her campaign. So tune in for that. Other than that, guys, you know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.